Katie and General Assembly for hosting us here. This is very exciting. This is actually our third event that we're doing, the second one with General Assembly. The first one was in Boston, the second one in San Francisco, and now here. So I work for a company called Small Improvements, and we're a performance feedback software, and we're helping companies communicate better. So we've been asked by a lot of our clients, like, how can we, what are others doing? And how can we just improve the situation of our managers within the organization? So we thought, why not bring a great community together and discuss that? Let's maybe start with just some introductions. If you want to just all introduce yourself a little bit with your background, where you're coming from, how long you've been a manager for, then we'll have a good overview. Cool.
Thanks. Hi everybody. My name is Neil Wilkes. I work at SoundCloud, which is just literally a couple of blocks down the road. We moved to West 23rd Street recently. My friend next door is going to kind of come and join us in a few months, I think. I've worked in HR since 1992, and probably have been a manager since about 1995. So lots of battle scars, I think, to potentially share tonight. I've moved around different countries to do HR, so I've picked up a lot of kind of really good cultural experience of managing different groups of people from different national backgrounds, and different kind of personal backgrounds as well. So I guess that's where my experience lies. It's great to meet you all.
My name is Joris. I'm not joining SoundCloud, but we are moving into the same building as SoundCloud, just to avoid any confusion here.
No, you're joining.
I work at a company called Grovo. It's a tech company based here in New York City, headquartered here. We're in the workplace learning software space and content space. Prior to that, I've been in tech for quite some time. Before this, I worked at a company called Squarespace, also based here in New York. And prior to that, at a company called Atlassian, which is based in Australia with offices globally. And prior to that, at some other companies, including even a government department. I know. That's a good introduction of you.
Okay. A little bit longer, maybe?
Go figure. I'm an engineer who crossed over to the dark side, and I can't figure this damn thing out. Speak with you. I have run recruiting and OD at several technology companies. I am, again, an engineer who crossed over to the dark side. There's a saying, there's no such thing as a former Marine, former Jesuit, former bartender, or former engineer. I have been managing in various forms since 1987, which makes me really friggin' old. And I've made, what I tell people is, people should feel part of the team. The only difference between me and you is I've already made the mistakes that you haven't made. So I try to impart that upon people. In the space, if you Google me, Steve Levy Recruiting, you see a lot of the crap I write. It's all out there. I'm very opinionated. Right, Linda?
Uh-huh.
And now I'm going to change my accent for Tanya.
Thank you. It's vaguely offensive, but I'm comfortable with that. Yeah. He has permission prior. And for me, originally. My name is Tanya Luna. I'm a facilitator and partner at a company called Life Labs Learning, and we specialize in manager training. My background's in psychology, and for the past 3 to 4 years now, I've been specifically focusing on research on managers and what makes managers great. So I'm really excited to be a part of this event.
Awesome, thank you. It is a great collection of people, I love it, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun here today, so I am partially petrified and partially really, really stoked. I did forget to say that hashtag manager tips, if you guys want to tweet, we're trying to build a little bit of a community around that and just share great articles and stay connected, so hashtag manager tips. All right, now what are we talking about here? What are managers? What is the role of a manager? Maybe share a little bit your thinking, Neil, what a manager is, and maybe also say what your best manager was like.
Wow. So let me start with my best manager. It was another Brit, and and we worked together in Nokia. I was at Nokia for about 6 or 7 years. And the thing that made her great for me was that she was remote. So we didn't actually come into too much contact day to day. And the key thing that I found about her is that she really trusted me and trusted, once she'd kind of given me a bit of direction, she let me get off and do my thing. And we checked in pretty regularly over the phone, and she just basically asked me the same question every time we talked, and she just said, "What do you need from me?" And it was about keeping me feeling like I was well supported and keeping me focused on the most important things that we needed to look over and deliver. So I think the key thing there was that she trusted me a lot, and I felt supported when I needed it, which I think kind of pretty nicely sums up the role of a leader. If you add on kind of a liberal dose of motivation and inspiration, that pretty much covers it up.
Do you see it the same way, Jonas?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, has anyone read Liz Wiseman's book, Multipliers? It's an awesome book. You should definitely read it for starters. But basically, what she talks about is great managers are able to extract capacity out of individuals. And what she means by that is every person, if you add up all your passion and your intelligence and your energy, all of it together is like maybe 100% capacity. Now, if you ask your workforce or your team or the person that reports to you, how much of their capacity is truly being utilized at the moment, it may not be 100%, probably isn't, right? In many organizations, it's actually closer to like 60%, maybe 70%. And it's the job of a manager to get that person to utilize as much of their intelligence as possible, as much of their capacity, their internal capacity as possible. So if I talk to my teams about what we want to do, is we want managers to be able to extract more capacity out of individuals because it's better for the people that reports them, right? I want to use 100% of my capacity. Plus, it's great for businesses as well, right? There's an economical advantage there as well. If you think of it, if your entire workforce only uses 60 or 70% of their capacity, there's a massive opportunity cost loss there. So I really like the way that she summarized that.
And what makes a manager great? That's a manager. So what is the one thing that would make a manager great? I see that you did not have a name tag.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think if you go from thanks, it's compassion, apparently. I think you get from really good to great if you get in this area of servant leadership when it's not about you anymore, it's about helping people be the best they can be, regardless of whether that's in your team or in someone else's team or someone else's organization. It's about that person's career, and obviously if you're able to help them be the best that they can be and do their life's best work, that's when you start getting in the area of being really, really great. And I think that there's a lot of coaching involved in that. There's understanding, the chess piece of organizational challenges and connecting that with individual strengths, etc., etc. I think that's that area. Great. Cool.
We like blended things that people, that's what managers do. They help people get over humps and barriers. So
Thank you.
you can have my name tag. I have a problem with the word manager. It's the root, manage. Manage, bless you. You're not allergic to this type of talk, is it?
No.
Good. Managers manage. They maintain the status quo. Now maybe that's an obscure lexical breakdown of this stuff, but when we're supposed to get, maybe managers is just the wrong word. Leaders help inspire and pull people out. Managers are like a grade of C. Leaders are grades of, I think, A- and up. That's what they aspire to. When I think of all the great leaders, no one calls George Washington a manager. No one calls Steve Jobs a manager. they're all leaders. You know, so that they have qualities where they can take people out of their comfort zone and push them to the places where they have no initial concepts, but they could go there.
For sort of the world of organizational psychology, the distinction you're talking about, the way that we talk about it in the world of psychology is managers essentially are helping to facilitate the resolution of predictable problems, whereas leaders are focusing on unpredictable problems. And I think that's why we're in this very fuzzy place now, especially for those of us where mostly we work with rapid growth tech companies. And so it's really tricky to understand what is a predictable versus an unpredictable problem. And so we've got these manager-leader situations, which I think goes with what you're saying.
Which brings up an interesting point, especially in the startup tech space, is anybody here ever worked for someone who you have to wonder why they were promoted to manager?
Really bad.
Okay, and there are other hands that I know some of the folks here, so I know they work for really godforsaken people. But that's it. I mean, there are two paths here. There's a path of we wish people could be more like this, and then there's the path. Well, you know, we need to, in order to maintain them and retain them, we have to promote them to being a manager. And all these things tend to work. They butt heads together, and they produce sort of unsettling type of stuff that, you know, everybody likes to write fast company articles about.
That's a problem. We say that inherently everybody that manages people manages unpredictable problems, right? So everybody's an individual, and it shouldn't be that predictable.
Where there's also special buttercups these days too.
Process it.
Yeah, right. I mean, especially if your goal is to help people be innovative. So it's basically like you're saying, how could you not just, like, we did training for a company that all of the managers were also rocket scientists. And so they're like, we're rocket scientists. We don't need manager training. We literally are rocket scientists. And then as we started working on these concepts, the managers need to be great at it. They're like, oh my gosh, this is so much harder than rocket science. Because, yeah, not only are you managing people who are inherently unpredictable, you're also trying to get those people to actually do unpredictable things. So it's a weird space.
I mean, the way you explain something is, you're trying to toilet train a 2-year-old. That's what it's like trying to manage people at times. There's that toilet training period in which they're just going all over the seat and stuff like that. And you go, no. And eventually with the proper, you know, formation and molding, if you know what the right ultimate behavior is, they get moved in that direction. That is not easy. And that's not taught in schools, by the way.
Potty training aside, what are the biggest challenges that managers face? Yeah.
I can answer this one because we've asked it to managers, actually have over 1,000 responses to this question. And despite the fact that, yes, most things are unpredictable, there do seem to be buckets, especially for newer managers, especially working in rapid growth companies, that seem to pop up again and again. So they tend to be challenges around motivation. How do I keep people motivated? Challenges around having difficult conversations. Challenges around helping people prioritize and or manage their time effectively. And then career growth is probably one of the biggest ones that also pops up in research on what are some of the biggest predictors of why people leave a company, and what are some of the biggest predictors of engagement is career growth. Do I feel like I'm learning and growing here? So oftentimes managers who don't even understand their own role are tasked with the responsibility of helping other people grow.
Excellent, and I mean, you bring up a very valid point. Would you say, Neil, that managers know what is expected of them at SoundCloud or Nokia or any previous organization you've been working with?
Expectations is a kind of a difficult subject, I think. I would say generally companies do a lot of work. If I take my last 2 or 3 companies, we've done a lot of work to try and help people who are managing others understand what's expected of them. Actually then helping them kind of live up to those expectations is a very, 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 very different thing. So in SoundCloud, for example, we do a couple of different things. So as soon as a person joins us as a manager or becomes promoted to be a manager, and a few things when I swing into action, we very, very quickly try and say to them, you're not on your own, because there can be a big sense of feeling on your own when you're into a company in a role like that, or perhaps you've joined a team as a peer and then you become the leader. It can be quite a lonely situation. So we make a mental connection very, very quickly and make sure that's somebody outside of outside their own work group. The other thing that we do is that we have one kind of leadership or management training program within the company, and we make it open to everybody who is a people leader. I worked in some companies, such as the bigger tech companies, that make leadership development a nominated privilege, which is kind of strange, right, when you're being tasked with sort of, I guess, growing the most important asset that a company has. Leadership development is accessed by privilege. It doesn't seem very good. So in SoundCloud, we make it accessible to all. We take people through 6 months of development looking at the toughest management challenges, so how to have difficult conversations, how to grow themselves and their team, how to manage conflict, which is something that exists everywhere. So we lean in really heavily, and also put a big emphasis on that person's leader to make sure that their one-to-one program kind of is a supportive thing as well. So 3 different ways that we do it.
Yeah, I think there's sort of that, do managers really know what is expected of them in terms of their job role first, and then the second piece is like, what do we do to support them in their daily sort of problems that they're having?
The other thing that we did to complicate the lives of the people manager back in January is that we did a company all hands. And one of our tech leaders stood up and said, these are the things that you can absolutely expect to see from every people manager in this organisation. So we made it very, very clear.
That's awesome.
Yeah, making it public is so good, right? I think lots of organizations actually don't have clear expectations on what's required from a manager. It sounds really weird, but like, for example, how often should you have a one-on-one with your direct report? Or how often should you have a strategy offsite? All of these questions can kind of be decided on a company-wide level, and it's actually really good to set those expectations across company of those things that managers really need to do. That is kind of like, it's kind of binary in nature, right? So that's why we came up with what we call a manager SLA, manager service level agreement, where we basically just write it down. Like, for example, we know it's probably good to send a first week plan to a new hire prior to them starting. It's common sense, but not all managers do this. And if you decide as a leadership group, hey, we're all going to get together and we're all going to do this, let's write it down, and that becomes an expectation. It's probably good to have a social outing with your team once a quarter. We know it's good to do those types of things. So let's write it down, and let's provide some budget for managers to actually to actually do that as well. So I think, one thing that really worked for us was to put together that service level agreement of minimum requirements, and then to provide support for each of those. So for example, if we say, you should have a one-on-one with your direct report on a weekly basis, then there is some supporting materials on how to run a one-on-one like that. If you say you should have a strategy offsite, then we will provide additional resources to help you set up that offsite, as well as to manage that offsite. So that worked very well. The other thing is just simply putting those requirements down in a bottom-up feedback loop, which we created. I think it's really good for everyone to give feedback to their direct manager. We actually are currently in the middle of a feedback loop, so all my direct reports gave me feedback, and it's fascinating because there's things in there that I just didn't really know that I didn't do very well as a manager, coming directly from my direct reports. It's, I live and breathe this stuff, right? I should be really, really good at this stuff, but some things I'm not so good at. And that self-awareness, it's good to just see black on white. So doing those feedback loops is, I think essential.
Are those anonymous or not?
Yeah. I mean, if you have a team of 2 people, it's easier to figure it out. But yeah, they're anonymous, and most managers would have a few more people in their teams, and it's near impossible to to figure it out. And then we provide the managers with instructions on what to do when that data comes back as well. So they, we don't just give them the data, but it's probably good to have a conversation with your team about the data and actually do something with it as well.
We do something similar, but it's actually not secret. It's open, so you know exactly which direct report is coming through. But it causes a lot of challenges trying to get people to give feedback.
See, one of the things that I do, Linda and I discussed this a few days ago, when I come into new groups, I write for each of them on a Post-it note. It's usually a fancy Post-it, like one of the hearts or the cloud things. I'm not kidding, because you've seen that.
Yep.
It's true. I write STFU. Yeah, that's what it means. And I give it to each person. Because I know I am imperfect. I say things that sometimes I probably shouldn't say. I'm a human being. Ta-da. So I tell people, it's your responsibility. If you don't want to say STFU to me, all you have to do in a meeting is hold up the Post-it note. And then that, what do I do? What do I do? Oh, now I know what I do. And as goofy as it sounds, it really works. I want to know what everybody is thinking and saying. Think of it. Our company, it's family. Shoot, you don't have anonymous surveys in your family. Everyone, you know when people are pissed off at you because they tell you these things. So I actually share those things, and that's the environment that I create. You have one chance to make a first impression, and I do it. The second thing I do is at the end of every week, everybody has to give me a GBU report. Anyone here know who Clint Eastwood is? One of his best movies ever. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So every week, I get the good, bad, and ugly report. And it really is, some of the ugly stuff is really freaking ugly. And then we talk, it's come on, and we talk it out as a group. And again, if you want to be honest, there's no shades of honesty. And in my opinion, the honesty policy is the best approach to managing a group. People, if you tell things that are in your heart and in your head, others will too, especially when they realize there are no repercussions.
So that goes very much into building a relationship with your team.
I think there's something else to what you're saying. You say stuff and I'll say the psychology behind it. Is it okay? You could do psychology.
Yeah, but as John knows, I somewhat sometimes have diarrhea in the mouth.
No, I think that to kind of piggyback off of what all of you are saying is that you're taking this role that's very ambiguous and taking relationships that are really ambiguous, and that creates a lot of cognitive load. So I see this all the time in workshops where managers are just really overwhelmed because of the amount of unknowns that they're juggling. And so just demystifying some of those things. I love working with companies that have taken the time to set, especially as binary as possible, to yours' point, some criteria around what success means. Because otherwise I'm in the middle of like a feedback training and I get questions like, am I supposed to fire people? And I go, I don't know. But what did your company say about it? And then they all kind of look at each other. And it's so often that I'll have a group of people in a room, and I would love to only use that time to practice and focus on skills. But so often they're sitting in the room going, when do we escalate? How do we escalate? Who's responsible for budgets? And so just reducing that cognitive load so that people can really focus on the hard, meaty stuff of helping develop people, I think is a huge contribution. And to that point, actually, I'll show something that was, yours doesn't even know it, or didn't know it prior to today, but was inspired by him. So I often talk about what the things we see the companies we work with doing effectively. And one of the things that we were really inspired by yours' group when he was working at Squarespace are these manager standards. And so we always talk about it with companies, but one of our companies that we're working with now, Weight Watchers, actually took it a step further and they printed out what they call their people leader playbook, which really demystifies for them. Here are the 12 behaviors, and they really tried to make it behavior-based. here are the 12 behaviors we expect of our people leaders. And that's tied to how they're being assessed, it's tied to the feedback that they're pulling from their direct reports. So it really creates a language and some shared norms to reduce some of that intense ambiguity that people are experiencing in these rapidly growing and complex organizations.
I think one of the challenges here is what is this system called? You know, companies tend to try to create a flowery system. It's performance management is such a dirty phrase these days. Performance management, we want to get rid of performance management systems. It's like it has the same cloud these days as resumes or things like that. What we call it really is critical in how we sell it, how we market it, how we sell it. I think we have an opportunity there to, not really perfume a pig, but
Or manage something else?
I don't care. I mean, the first system I ever created was 1987. Jesus, God, I'm old. We used to call it, this was at Pitney Bowes. Pitney Bowes mailing companies, yesterday's technology, tomorrow's prices today. We used to call it the performance plan. It was called the performance planning and feedback system. And these things that you talk about, we call those performance factors. Because that was post-MBO days, management by objectives, which thank God is not something that's strictly taught these days. But these things have been around for decades. We're almost in the repackaging phase. Another repackaging phase again, to make it more palatable, which means we fail miserably each time to get people, to get companies to understand what this really means and what it can really do for them. There's a tipping point here.
It's a great point, actually, because one of the challenges with creating standards is you're telling people what to do, and you're hiring people that don't like it when you tell them what to do. They typically, in these types of organizations, they have a high need for autonomy. I've heard rumors that at Squarespace there was some work done internally to be able to share what works for managers at Squarespace. Right? So that the standards were based on something a little bit more organic?
Yeah, so basically, and we did exactly the same with Grovo, where we started out as like the feedback loop for managers, where we actually find data about what employees, the feedback that employees give to their managers, and we base those standards based on that. So if you see that managers who always have one-on-ones with their direct reports just get higher ratings because the trust factors are higher, there is some data that sits behind it as well. And we didn't just use that research, that internal research, but there's also a bunch of other information available. Like Google did great research with Oxygen, their Oxygen research. Facebook recently did pretty extensive research with it as well. This is not, it's not rocket science. It's just kind of.
It's harder than rocket science.
It's harder than rocket science. It's just the as you mentioned, the simplification of it. And to your point earlier, I think the buy-in comes from managers actually deciding these minimum frequencies themselves. I mean, if you go to a group of managers and you say, you will have to do one-on-ones every single week, you will get pushback. If you go to a group of managers and say, how often do you think we should do one-on-ones, and they decide as a group together to do it once a week, it creates clarity.
And then you ask the employees how often would you like to have these, how frequently would you like to have these.
Not everybody needs one to one every week, right? Some people start to feel cramped and
How often should you be doing one-on-ones? What do you think?
to me it's an individualistic thing based on the team member and manager. You should find your own cadence based on. I used to love the old situational leadership model, which was guiding managers to sort of lean in with their people based on how confident they are and how competent they are. And the more you grow in capability, the more you grow in confidence, the kind of less input you technically need from your manager, which is a really easy way for people to start to think about it, but then it's still highly individualistic.
Yeah, I agree, and I disagree. I think in a highly fast-growing tech company, there's so much uncertainty already. So it's kind of nice to kind of put a stake in the ground, and also a lot of one-on-ones, for example. This is just one thing, right? One-on-ones is probably the most discussed worthy one there. If if no one would object to a yearly strategy outside or setting a first week plan to a new starter prior to them starting. All of that stuff is kind of more, norm. But one-on-ones, it's not really about providing coaching all the time. It's just kind of checking in where a person sits emotionally, right? If they had any frustrations or wins like in the last week, and that could be it, right? It doesn't have to be long, but so I say once a week is good. But then when in my previous companies, they were more aligned with what you just said. So
I guess where I find myself being sometimes with my boss, and we have a great relationship, is that I actually have nothing to say, right? And that's where I think the frequency becomes a more negotiated thing, I guess.
Do you have any questions that you ask people to, or that you support managers or staff on what they should be talking about in the one-on-ones?
Yeah, I can share that. I mean, we hear, the biggest challenge we hear from managers about their one-on-ones is that their direct reports cancel them, which is a funny one, because they're like, well, I'm putting it on the calendar, I'm making time and effort for it. And when we dig in deeper, they say that sometimes we just stare at each other and it's awkward, we don't know what to talk about.
Sounds like speed dating.
Speed date, except for an hour, and with only
Yes.
one person. So I think that the impact we've seen, the thing that we've seen make an impact is a perspective shift on that one-on-one just being an opportunity to check on work progress, into shifting that time as this is our sacred time that we know we'll always have, and no matter how crazy things get, you'll always have my undivided attention during this time. And if they start thinking about it that way, then they start going, okay, I guess I can start thinking a little bit more long-term in these sessions. We can focus on feedback. We can focus on helping coach the person to figure out some of those bigger, meatier problems. So, I mean, in terms of questions, ideally they're not just questions like, how are things going? Are you making progress? Which is the most common question that people ask. But they're asking questions like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your level of motivation? Kind of scarier questions that you don't turn and say like, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your, but starting to really dig into more long-term thinking and internal insights into what the person is excited about or frustrated about, what are team dynamics like. So I think it's just really shifting to thinking about that time as really getting to know the person and developing that person, developing that relationship as well.
What I do is I focus on performance. The initial questions are about performance. We have this project, we have this deliverable. How's it going? What's good, what's bad, what's ugly? In the discussion, because that's what they're there for. We have people to solve problems, not to, can I see what to play check and play foosball? We're there to solve problems. So the focusing on performance is it's always been a natural way into all the other supporting things, the now and the future. It's like what Tanya and I were talking about earlier, talking about how to do exit interviews. We're somewhat saying how many people we've laid off, which is what HR people do when they get together. It's a character flaw. One of the things, that my exit interviews always start with, not what didn't you like about this place, because we know what they didn't like about this place, but tell me, what did you like best about this place? It's changing the tenor of the questioning. It's changing the atmosphere, and it's focusing on positive stuff rather than on negative stuff. And the same thing with regular meetings with your employees. You focus on the positive stuff. What are the wins? What's the positive? What's the good stuff? It's always going to eventually flow into the opportunities for improvement. But you need to understand that they're there because they're being paid to solve problems.
So one-on-ones are tactical or more for the career development, coaching?
Well, when you talk about how the problems are being solved, if you have enough insight and experience as a manager, you're going to get into the performance gaps. Invariably, if things aren't aren't being achieved at an agreed upon level, to the SLA level, because, projects and SLAs, deliverables, statements of works, what you're going to get to the area of what they need to improve, what the team needs to improve, the dynamics, the internal dynamics, the external dynamics, they're all there. And it's all part of that discussion.
Okay, this is, did you want to add something to the one-on-ones?
Yeah, so I think one tiny thing. One thing I've found is that it is really important for a manager to understand what's going on with a person emotionally. Just where they sit, if they're frustrated by something, or if they're particularly happy about something. So the focus on work and progress will come up during one-on-one regardless. But if you start with that, what I've found is it's very hard to kind of get back to that. And your one-on-one will only be about work progress and status.
Well,
So,
if that's the case, then we need managerial training.
yeah, so my managerial training would suggest to start with wins and frustrations and then go into work progress later. Because it is really hard. Even I find it very hard. I sit down with my boss, right, the CEO of the company, and we go into work, into work status mode. And then it's kind of really awkward to, at the end of the conversation, to say, so how are you feeling? It just doesn't really work. So
It's not a waterfall process. It's an agile process.
An agile process. The one-on-one is an agile process.
Well, I mean, you're saying performance and then personal, that they're distinct. They're tied in together. If you know your employee, if you know your people on your team well.
Yeah, sure. And I think
I was looking at your Facebook page, and I noticed you've been. Come on, managers all look at their employees. Social media. Some do.
I suppose the question is whether the one-on-ones are starting to be more tactical or starting with a sort of personal level and being there as a partner.
I think
Positive,
the most difficult part of the one-to-one to get into, as you said, right? Especially if you're a less experienced manager, how do you start to unlock how somebody's emotions are going? My boss's boss uses this little technique, which I think is a bit cheesy, but that's because I'm quite old, which she just says, give me a traffic light on how you're feeling inside of work and how you're feeling outside of work and tell me why. And it just kind of starts to unlock.
Very simple. I totally agree. And especially what I'm referring to is, inexperienced managers. I think that if you're really experienced as a manager, you probably can start to play with things a lot more. But then, if you have a person who's a manager for the first year, again, to that cognitive load issue, it's probably good to provide a little bit of structure in terms of how you run a good one-on-one. The other thing with one-on-one is to always try to provide feedback, also constructive feedback. And what I try to say is that if you really stop giving constructive feedback, you kind of stop caring about a person or about their work, and that's probably a little bit harsh. But if you really want a person to improve and do their life-based work, right, you want them to get better, and therefore you have to force yourself to think about their work that they do very, very hard, and then if you do that, you'll find things that people can improve as well. So it's really important for managers to get into this rhythm of finding both positive and constructive feedback to give, because it shows that you care as a manager.
I will be, that is fantastic. That leads to the question, if we had some kind of SLAs, we know that it's really complicated to train people. We need to give them some guidance. Some companies do, some don't. Where do you start? Like, Tanya, you've done a lot of research on managers and what makes managers great, what the better managers are doing. Where's the one point that you would start, or what makes the biggest impact?
You mean aside from standards?
Yep.
So one of the things that we focus on at Life Labs are what we think of as tipping point skills. So if you're going to concentrate your training in some area that's going to give you the most bang for your buck, so to speak, what would that be? And for us, what we've come to is the 4 main things that came out of our research on those tipping point skills. The first one is something that people don't often realize, and that's question skills. So it's really getting people skilled in, I think it gets to the fundamental understanding of what it means to be a manager. Is it's not just to give people information to direct, but it's to ask questions so that people could own the answers themselves. So we call it coaching skills, because if we call it question skills, people are kind of suspicious. But coaching skills, the next one is feedback skills, that's giving feedback, and actually probably as importantly, getting trained in how to receive feedback, because the signal setting action. If I'm really bad at receiving feedback, then you're not really going to be comfortable giving me that feedback, and it's not creating that cultural norm within the team. So it's coaching, it's feedback, it's prioritization skills. It's probably a really, really huge one that people struggle with. And then the last one, which is somewhat controversial, is effective one-on-ones. So how to really use that one-on-one time well. I think the one-on-ones, just a quick little add-on to that, one of the reasons, and this really surprised us, why is it that one-on-ones kept popping up as a behavior of great managers, and especially regularly scheduled one-on-ones. And I think it has something to do with the fact that most of the companies we work with have these open plan workspaces. And so a challenge is, when do I have these conversations? When do I give feedback? When do I ask for feedback? When do we align on priorities? These are kind of vulnerable, uncomfortable, scary conversations, and the one-on-one is an opportunity to, first of all, safely have those conversations, but also not just to think about the work, but to really think about their thinking. So if you were going to, that's not really answering your question of one place to start, but
One of those 4 great areas
places to start. And if you were going to focus on just one, I would say question skills.
Because manager training is so important, like as you were working on manager training as well, like you came up with a whole bunch of sort of aha moments to get people to understand a little bit what it means to be a manager.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, like, when we started thinking about manager training, we started to think, well, what's the most essential things? And we focused on helping managers to make their people shine, and then building 8-player teams. There's a lot of other management competencies to focus on as well, but on a rough meta level, those are the 2 topic areas that probably have a lot of like bang for your buck, right? And in terms of where we started was really where, you know, where you would start with a new team regardless, which is more around, you know, the first day in the job, you cannot provide really, really insightful coaching skills yet. You probably focus more on providing direction, and you know, and then you kind of get to know the individual that report to you. You start having, you know, great one-on-ones. You start having great, start asking more questions as a manager. I think what I love about Live Labs is that, you know, they do a very similar thing. What we're trying to do is to create these little surprising moments that maybe that kind of shifts people's framework, their frame of mind. We call them aha moments, where people are like, ah, shit, that is, you know, that's really insightful, and I didn't know that. And it's a really small hack that you can implement, and it can have a massive impact. So, for example, did you know that if you have a mobile phone laying next to you during your one-on-one, your one-on-one is very likely to be less effective. And it's just a small thing, you know, your mobile phone, I always have it next to me, but now I put it in my pocket because it's, you know, and it's like, you know, did you know that, like, effective negotiators ask twice as many questions as ineffective negotiators? Questions is a life skill. You know, if you know those really awkward, like, dates where there's one person just talking and the other person is just sitting there, and it just, you know that date that you see happening next to you in a restaurant is doomed to, is doomed to fail, right? I mean, in relationships, personal relationships, people ask a lot of questions. Great managers ask a lot of questions. Great negotiators ask a lot of questions. So I think what we're trying to do is create those aha moments for people so they realize a small change can have a maximum impact. So that's, yeah. Does that answer?
Yep. Okay. Just to piggyback off of that, I think if you're not partnering with someone to do manager training and leading it internally, one of the challenges I've seen of internally led manager training programs is they tend to be very focused on really large abstract concepts, like help people grow, you know, or be a great coach. And I think, you know, to Jorts's point, it's really about the tiny things. especially inexperienced people, but really even experienced people, because we work with managers that have been doing it for a while, and they don't remember what it is that they're doing, they're just doing it. So really making it as small as possible. So like with question skills, one of the aha moments, and one of the really small tools that we give people is to shift your closed questions to open questions. So instead of asking a lot of do you think kinds of questions, instead you say, what are your thoughts on? And so it's a really tiny tweak, but people don't walk away saying, I've got to be more of a motivator. They walk away saying, I have to ask more open questions. And so if you can make it something that people can touch and see, you can make it so that people can do that thing.
This really resonates with me. Both at SoundCloud and Nokia, we've kind of taken that concept and built communities of managers that talk about these things amongst themselves and share just practical hints and tips. And I think you can build up, even if it's a small community that meet together regularly, that actually just talk about the toughest things that managers are facing month to month, share stories and share hints and tips. It's a really good way of not necessarily having kind of formal leadership development, but just good practice sharing, which is just about good community building, I think.
I think one of the ironies here is most companies will keep their managerial leadership policies, practices, behaviors, whatnot, within their own silos. There's a movement out there, John, you know about this, it's the HROS movement, HR open source. And it's HROS. I can't remember. So you'll have to look it up. Just HROS, HR open source, in which Lars Schmidt and Ambrosia Vertesi and a countless cast of others are sharing their case studies, their best practices across all their organizations. There are now 500+ case studies. And I think it's incumbent upon your organization to be involved in these movements and to share these things. Because it's great in your silo, but once you move those practices to another silo, it's entirely possible they become less effective. So the extent to which you share all these things and trade and augment and whatnot, everybody becomes better.
Can I ask a question about that to everyone? So one of the things that we work on is trying to give companies tools for facilitating continued internal learning. Once we're gone, once Life Labs has left the building. And so some of the things that we provide are like ideas for how to lead manager dens. We got that frankly from Etsy, working with them. So it sounds like kind of what you're describing here, but we give like discussion guides, we give recommendations for how to do it, but it seems like most companies try it and then kind of give up because they find that managers get together and just either complain or they show up and then they stop showing up. So I feel like we haven't quite figured out how to help support people in doing these things effectively. I'm wondering if anyone has advice.
That goes to, I read 2 business books in my life. I read the others, but these are the 2 I remember. There's one called Jack Stack, The Great Game of Business, 1983. Jack was the founder of Springfield Remanufacturing, Springfield, Missouri. And the major thing I remember from that book is, he said, in Missouri, we have a saying, shit rolls downhill. So to the extent that, if the person at the top, the fish stinks from the head and the fish leaves from the head. If the person at the top isn't doing what you want all your other managers to do, you have about a snowball's chance in hell of getting everybody on the same page.
On a more positive note, what can we do to make it sticky? Do you have any ideas, Joris, how to make a manager training?
For that, I'm just curious, like, I think there's so much about that peer-to-peer learning, like we facilitate that so much in workshops. I'd say at least 40% of the time, we're not teaching anything, we're facilitating discussion within the room. And I'm curious, for those internally led sessions, how do you facilitate peer-to-peer learning without people getting together and complaining, which is one of the biggest complaints that I've heard about peer-to-peer learning attempts?
I guess there's a couple of things. One is about finding the right subjects for that group to talk about. So if it's a subject that is like hugely relevant, and the way I've done that in the past is to sort of regularly poll the management community about what's top of mind and what they're finding tough. And the second thing is always to have an active kind of senior leadership sponsorship within that, or active participation within that group. So, for example, when I was at Nokia, there's always a session led by one of the senior leadership who curated the subject with an expert every time. And I always find that managers are more likely to engage if it's not just perceived as another HR leadership training session. And the other thing that kind of kept it alive is once you have that community established, is to start finding kind of mentorship pairings. And going back to Joris's point earlier on, particularly in Nokia, we had tons of data about aspects of managers' performance and feedback from their teams. So we were able to pinpoint leaders who weren't doing pretty well at engaging their teams with leaders that were. And that really sustained the kind of community feel.
Yeah, I don't think I've got a really great answer here. I think one thing that that did work, and this is a few companies ago, is to actually put like a business challenge in front of managers and talk about that. So for example, how should we be doing, performance reviews? That was back then when, we still did the traditional performance reviews. How should we improve it? So there's this element of buy-in, and then maybe discuss topics around it. Because otherwise, it can be a little bit of a complaining session. I see that. But if you challenge the group to come up with a solution to a certain problem, it's better. The other thing is that because we're kind of trying to space learning over time, so to kind of drip feed learning, it's a little bit easier because you kind of, you learn a new topic, like for example question skills, and then you can discuss that together as a group, right? So it's a little bit, maybe with face-to-face training, we did it once, and then there's a long time of no face-to-face training, and then again face-to-face training. To sustain leadership dense, as what Etsy had throughout that time in between, may make it a little bit less relevant to managers.
Thank you. Sorry, I hijacked.
Just one thing I do with recruiting is every new manager, when they're hiring, I sit on the first couple of interviews. And I'll actually do the first few, and I'll lay out the modeling plan, and they'll follow along, and eventually they'll get to the point where they can, do these things by themselves. But I also come back in later. I regularly come back in and sit on in and see how they're doing, give them a couple of, tweaks on the side. Might pass them some notes during the interview. I really do that. That's how you reinforce it. If you want your managers to continue to improve, you have to be involved with them continuously. If you want them to improve their employees, they have to be involved with their employees on a regular basis. It's not a static thing. It's lifelong learning. It's continuous learning. There's no such thing as expertise when it comes to management. And it's just something that you continuously have to keep your eye on. And it takes time. But that's what we get paid the big bucks for, I suppose, right?
I suppose so. But I think we had a few actionable advice here on how to have an SLA, how to model behavior from others, what sort of areas to start with. What are some more actionable, before we go into some Q&A to the audience, what are some other actionable advice maybe that you have for new managers, or would you like sharing a particular book or another resource? What is something that we can take out of this?
I will use one of my favorite books that is going to make you tilt your head to the side like a golden retriever. I used this during marriage counseling when I was younger and stupid, didn't take it seriously. The book is called Getting the Love You Want by Harville Hendrix. And the reason why it's a really good book, and Lynn Flask, because she heard it earlier, is there's something called imagotherapy. And it asks the question, when you do this, it makes me feel this. Just an absolute brainstorm. When I finally started adapting it into a management session. Believe it or not, the love you want will Hendrix. Bless you. I feel your pain.
So much pressure. What was the question again? An actionable, piece of advice?
Yes.
One thing. So it seems to me that when we work with managers that they they have a lot of implicit expectations, and they're not quite sure what they're allowed to say explicitly. So I would say one of the things you can help managers recognize is that it's their job to make expectations explicit. So they'll say, well, can I give someone feedback on this thing? I didn't even tell them they should be doing it. So ideally, first you tell them that they should be doing it, and then if they're not doing it, then you give them feedback. So again, it goes back to this reducing cognitive load, demystifying, helping managers communicate really, really clearly. One of the things we focus on in training is getting rid of blur words. So blur words are words that can be interpreted by different people in different ways. So if I say something like, that was a really engaging presentation. Engaging is really, I can't learn from that. What do you mean by engaging? So one takeaway I've had in working with managers is really helping them get the blurs out of their communication, whether that's in literally language or in how they set expectations.
Awesome, love that. Yours?
We've been kind of like looking at when managers most want training, when they're most motivated, because generally speaking they pick up training mostly when they're most motivated. So one thing that we've been really pushing is to what we call provide training at the point of need. So for example, if you've just promoted a manager in your team to a management role, it's good to provide training at that point in time. It's probably good to send that manager's manager some instructions as well on how they can be the best manager, how they can provide training like this. If you just hire a new person, it's probably good to get some instructions on how to put together a first week plan. If your engagement survey demonstrates that you're not giving good feedback to your people, that's a point when the motivation for you is high to learn. And I think what we often do is we have stagnant forms of training. It's spaced over time, which often face-to-face in nature, and it's tough to do this, right? You can't always be in the point of need. We can't all be a Facebook who hires coaches for every single one of their managers, because it's very, very expensive. So how do we solve that? How do we get training to people at the point of need? And it's definitely possible, and you can do that. So that's kind of what we've been focusing on, and my greatest advice is try to make use of the fact that people are motivated. The peak performance or the peak degree of motivation to learn is at certain times, and that's at those times of change.
I guess my piece of advice would be that if you're kind of new to a managerial role or new to a company in a management role, is that things are going to be quite overwhelming. You're going to have a lot of new things to process, and finding yourself an internal mentor that can help you navigate the landscape in your new role is critical. And part of that landscape that you should research is to go to each of your team and ask them what they expect of you.
Yeah.
This is something I've been thinking about lately. It's occurred to me lately that managers are sometimes scared to develop their people because they're not quite sure what happens after that. So like, for example, if I've done a really good job of getting my team to be really autonomous and self-sufficient, and if I've grown them to the point where they know how to do everything I can do, and I've delegated everything, what happens to me after that?
Well, I recruit them already, so just open spot, so don't worry.
Okay, I'll let them know. So you can either send them to Steve, or I think that there's an opportunity to demystify things even further, because one of the barriers to great management is the fear that you'll train your own replacement, so to speak, which is the goal, but what happens to you next, especially in an organization where there's no career path. What's the motivation that managers should sort of aspire to when helping people know how to do all the things that they know how to do? I don't have an answer to that, but I think that's a really interesting one to tackle.
Because that's a discussion that they should have with their managers.
Right. Yeah, because otherwise you never know if you're doing the right thing. Should I be delegating all this stuff?
Comes back to the expectations, right? Do I know what it means to be a manager? Do I know what it means to succeed as a manager here? And how do you sort of measure that? And how do you keep the motivation going. I would like to open it up to the audience at this point because we're running late. I kind of love some really actionable snippets and advice. We're filming everything, we'll be sharing, we love communities. I would love to pass it over to the audience for any kind of questions that you might have that we haven't covered. Because I still have 7 million, but hi.
How are you? Really enjoy this. Sheena Lee. I'm actually a career development coach and went into business for myself. But prior, I was a manager of multiple teams, multiple personalities, skill sets, performance abilities, etc. And one of my biggest challenges when I think support, accountability, and empowerment are really important balance. However, if my leadership, A, wasn't giving that autonomy to me, but if I was trying to empower my teams and I said yes, she would say no, how does that make me look? If I'm saying no and she's saying yes, so managing up was really a challenge for me. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I think the way we teach manager skills is that technically, in the field of psychology, they're often called boundaryless organizations, where there isn't like a concrete, straight hierarchy. Ideally, everyone is managing each other. So I'm giving feedback to my peers, I'm giving feedback to my manager. It's essentially all the same skills. Although ideally, the organization, its leadership gives permission for that kind of interaction. And we've seen those kind of organizations really develop a learning culture, which leads everyone to develop faster. So ideally, there's no like managing up, managing down. It's just everyone is asking really good questions, giving feedback, helping align on priorities.
I suspect that in an organization, if one manager feels that way, then I suspect that at least one of their peers feels that way, and that's when you call a quorum.
What?
The quorum. You call your peers together. Are you feeling the same way about about our manager? There's strength in numbers. And I mean, it's not like a hostile takeover, but get together and talk about amongst each other. I mean, use all the skills that you supposedly learned or pushing down to your group. Use with each other. Come up with a plan. Attack if need be.
Excellent. Was that helpful?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yes.
I think it's bringing up a point, first of all, picking the kind of company you work for, but isn't it our place and the leaders of the company's place to have, if we're expecting, first of all, and I have a big thing with saying managers, I really like the term leaders better, but if we're expecting us, our leaders to develop and to do great things with their teams, then they have to have our support. We have to have a career path like you talked about for them. And that's easier in some companies. But we need to have that in place for them so that they can be successful. And if we have great leaders, they're developing great leaders automatically because that's what they do. So where do those leaders go? And it goes back to another question, which I was just, there's so many things that are going through my head with this discussion, but who supports and helps those leaders? I mean, they need to have that behind them. And it goes back to your question too. That person wasn't a great leader to begin with, and she didn't want leaders under her. She wanted people who just kind of keep the status quo. So I think it comes back to, we all have responsibilities to it, and we have to facilitate a culture that really does grow and supports those leaders to keep growing.
I agree with that. I'll share a secret. Don't film this. So we offer, manager training, and then sometimes the executive groups. Ideally, the executive groups are getting training too, and so they're like, "What's your executive training?" We're like, "Oh yeah, we'll do the executive version." It's the same version. So it's the same version. Of course, the conversation is different. We facilitate it slightly differently, but it's the same skills, and we see so much more impact when leaders go through manager training. I'm with you on the language, but just for the sake of simplicity, ideally they're trained on a lot of the same stuff so that there's also shared vocabulary, norms, and expectations so that they're modeling it. Because when we work in organizations where the leaders within the organizations aren't getting trained, I guarantee you people in the workshops are going to say, are they taking this? When are they going to take this? So yeah, I'm with you, and I think it's the same fundamental skills, but you have to rebrand it so that they feel really good about it.
One thing that you bring up is
like development of people and development of leaders. And in a flat organization such as ours and so many other tech companies, that's quite hard, right? So one skill that we're trying to teach our leaders is that upward mobility may not be able to be achieved in certain roles. And this is where leadership comes in. Like everyone is a leader, right? A bit like the concept of like the Reid Hoffman's like Tour of Duties. If you read the book, right? But more on a role level, where you basically say, like connect almost that concept with the Marcus Buckingham strength-based philosophy, where you draw out what really truly energizes the people in your team. It takes time, but it's definitely possible, and you should do that as a manager. And then to outline team challenges or organizational challenges on a higher level, but team challenges on a lower level. You know, very practical example. One of the managers in our sales team came to me. Well, he said, well, you know, these people just need to sell stuff, and that's, you know, and that's how they develop, and hopefully they can at some point replace me. But that won't happen. And all these people on the team are all eager to learn, and they wanted to develop, and they wanted to grow in their career. So we outlined a number of team challenges. One of the team challenges was was a lack of communication with the other support or the other sales teams in the group. So one of the challenges that needs to be resolved is to improve inter-team communications. One of them, so you can kind of come up with all these team challenges that a manager that kind of creates stepwise improvement for that particular team. And instead of doing it yourself, delegate it to the people aligned with those individual strengths. If a person is really excited about, project management, they can do a project like that. Some people may be really interested in researching things and can come up with a new script for a sales script for on the phone and say, we want to improve our sales script so much that we convert more sales. Your challenge is to do just that. And I think it's really interesting because suddenly you start developing leadership skills in everyone in a very flat organization, which is a challenge that we had. And quite frankly, every organization, tech organization I worked at, were all quite flat. So they all had that same problem.
Just to clarify, so I don't think that it's realistic for most companies to have a very clear-cut career path. We've seen many companies try and it doesn't quite work. The metaphor I like is going from like climbing a ladder to rock climbing. And so, to your point, it's really helping people think about how to find growth opportunities no matter what role they're in. But ideally, there's explicit communication about that. Like when we worked with Warby Parker, their CEOs actually started talking about this rock climbing vision as a norm within the company so that people had a different understanding of what it might mean to grow. But again, ideally those conversations happen explicitly so that people aren't going, what is growth around here? How do I grow? What's next for me?
High potential doesn't have to be promotion. And so every organization has tremendous opportunities for improvement. So if you identify your hypos, put them together in a room and tell them to find a problem and solve a problem. That's a really good way to develop skills and solve problems.
I guess there is another angle to this and this comes up a lot in SoundCloud, very like the flat organisation that you talked about, but when somebody's path and growth is exhausted with us, we actually celebrate when they find their next career step outside of the company, right? Which is a really positive way to look at just life, I think. And I kind of take it is that, not everybody's career will be with us for a lifetime. We just want to be something that they remember and they give us some great things in the process.
But they can boomerang back if you do it.
And they can come back, yeah, absolutely.
That is wonderful. It brings up like 70 more questions. Is there a difference between managers and leaders, or is it really synonymous? Do companies have enough, not only career ladder, but individual contributor career plan and development that they actually show and that are well rewarded as well?
I can say from a military standpoint, there's a real big difference between managers and leaders. Managers get people killed. Leaders might get people killed, but there are many different ways to prevent that.
Just from like we've done research on what manager challenges are. We've also now started looking at what leader challenges are. And what I mean by that is managers, so like, their job is, I hate this term too, but like middle manager versus executives within the organizations, their challenges are quite different. So managers, their problems are relatively predictable. I also am all for change. Like if we could rebrand it, I hate the idea of anyone being managed. No one wants to be managed. But they're facilitating the resolution of relatively predictable problems. Whereas if your job is to figure out the strategy and vision of your organization, your challenges and skills are going to be, ideally you also have the manager skill set, but there seems to be this other layer. So
Visionary, technical, manager, leader.
strategy.
One more question maybe before we end this. Any final thoughts? Anyone? No? Well, I hope you really enjoyed that. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts. That's